Welcome to DEFCON 3. I'm KT McFarland. Fighting continues in the town of Kobani between ISIS and the coalition partners, particularly Kurdish forces, and American bombing raids. To talk about the effectiveness of this counterinsurgency strategy and where it goes from here is Lieutenant Colonel John Nagl. He is the author of a new book called Knife Fights. Sounds good, right? And the former president of the Center for New American Security, and also someone who has been in Afghanistan and Iraq as an Army infantry officer.
Army cavalryman, yes, ma'am.
Army cavalry. Let me ask you, we've had the debate about boots on the ground in the United States. Other countries are having it. We've seen the effectiveness, which has been effective, of the coalition bombing raids and bombing attacks. But what happens next? Boots on the ground, and if so, whose?
They haven't been as effective as they could be.
Oh.
And so we currently have about 1,400, 1,500 American troops on the ground. They are staying back from the front lines of battle. They're helping with the training and the planning for operations, but they are not going forward with Iraqi or Kurdish forces to the front lines, calling in airstrikes themselves. Those American eyes calling in airstrikes, American access to intelligence at the tip of the spear, would multiply the effectiveness of the campaign against ISIS radically. And my belief is we're going to see that move here in the next several weeks.
But you know, the political will, the president keeps saying no American boots on the ground. Are the coalition partners, the 21 nations that met last week at Andrews Air Force Base, they agreed on a lot of things, but none of them agreed to step up with combat forces.
Well, I think they're hearing an uncertain trumpet from the president right now. So obviously we do have boots on the ground. The 1,400 guys on the ground are wearing combat boots. I promise they are currently not engaged in direct combat, and I'm not advocating that step. What I think the president is right, that our objective is to defeat and ultimately destroy ISIS. The way to do that is with Iraqi and Kurdish forces, with local forces. But the means to make that more effective is American advisors much closer to the front lines than they currently are. That's going to increase the risk for those guys, but it's going to multiply the effectiveness of our strategy. It's going to allow us to defeat and destroy ISIS much more rapidly, and that's worth the additional risk.
Okay, so but then what happens then? Even if those, it's really providing an intelligence function for the bombing.
And calling in airstrikes, Americanized calling in airstrikes.
So then what happens after that? We bomb them to the point where there's nothing left to bomb, then somebody's got to take territory.
So, and the Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces are going to do that, and we'll be able to do that with American logistics help. That's another thing that those American advisors bring inside those units. We saw for the first time, very importantly, American airdrops of ammunition to Kurdish forces in Kobani, a very important next step, and a little bit of a line being crossed there. I can see much more of that happening in days to come as well.
So what are you talking about for numbers?
So about 15,000. So
15,000?
About 10 times the current number of troops. They are, we have an enormously well-trained force, a battle-hardened force. We can do this, and time really is of the essence. First, ISIS is literally on the gates of the Baghdad International Airport. We've used Apache gunships to push them back. So we do very much have American forces engaging in close combat already. We need to hold that airport. If the airport falls, this is going to be much longer and much harder. But also, ISIS is using every day that it retains momentum as a recruiting tool to bring in more Westerners into its jihad. ISIS has become Jihad University. Most worrisome is that a number of their recruits have Western passports. And so those people, trained and inspired to conduct jihad, battle-hardened on the ground in Syria and Iraq, inspired by the success of ISIS over the last 8 months, are going to be a long-term threat that are going to infect the international system. The sooner we stop this, the sooner we blunt ISIS's momentum and start pushing them back, we need to change that global narrative to keep this long-term threat from emerging.
What about Turkey? Turkey has been unwilling to join the fight, but then in the last day or two they've said that they will allow not Turkish forces to do the fighting, but Kurdish forces to transit the Turkish border to do the fighting.
And that's another important step in the right direction. So the Kurdish forces fighting inside Kobani have had a really good couple of days. For the first time, they've gotten American-provided, American-transported, actually, Albanian-provided, of all things, ammunition, which they were in desperate need of after the month of fighting they've had in town. And for the first time, they're getting Iraqi-Kurdish reinforcements across the Turkish border. The combination of those two things, logistics transported by American airplanes, Turks allowing reinforcements to come in from Iraq, probably guarantees that Kobani's not going to fall. It's a real bloody nose for ISIS, which tried really hard. ISIS understands the propaganda war. That's the war they're trying to win. More important for them than taking and holding ground is winning the media war and attracting more recruits, attracting more money from the international jihadi coalition. This is a first step, I think, toward blunting that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel John Nagl, author of Knife Fights, which can be found at Amazon and a bookstore near you. Is that right?
It is indeed. Thanks, Katie.
Okay, that's it for DEF CON 3 and KT McFarland.